Chapter 5. She didn't sleep well. While quarantined at Moore's facility outside downtown Houston, she had been forced to relive every moment of their time at Miskatonic University. The nickname had been given to a structure designed and constructed during the 1960s at the now mostly decommissioned Ellington Field Air Base to house extraterrestrial biological entities, EBEs, or substances recovered from space exploration. The facility had been in ill repair after decades of neglect had taken their toll, the foundations slowly crumbling beneath Sarah and the rest of Moore's employees. When one of the creatures escaped containment, the situation in the facility quickly grew out of control. After evacuating Miskatonic of its remaining people, Moore destroyed and sank most of the facility into the moisture-laden ground far below the surface. But not before the creature had killed the last remaining functional member of her SWAT team. Not before taking people she'd personally recruited for the facility. And not before riddling her sleep with fucking nightmares. She tossed and turned most of the night despite the reassuring whisper and static of the ocean currents, the gentle rock of the boat, and the hum of the idling diesel engines recharging the vessel's batteries. If she'd been on this ship before Ben Taub, she'd have been asleep in seconds. But not that night. Moments after finally falling asleep, she was awakened when Keko weighed anchor, and the heavy steel chain rubbed against the ship's metal hull. To her, it sounded like machine gun fire, which brought up another round of unpleasant memories. However, when she realized what it was, she managed to close her eyes again and drift. The knock on her berth's hatch instantly pulled her from sleep. Her eyes flicked open as she rose at the waist, her fists again clenched into a fighting stance. She breathed in rapid chuffs, unsure what had startled her. The knock came again. "Sarah?" Rags said from behind the hatch. "Time for breakers." The scent of something wonderful drifted into her nose. Something baked, something sugary, and something meaty. The smells combined to make Sarah's mouth water. "Hi, Rags," she croaked, her voice choked with sleep. "Be there in a minute." "Copy," Rags said, and her footsteps up the stairs echoed in the small stateroom. Sarah grinned. After diving into the shower for a quick rinse, she donned the same pair of pants and blouse, only this time she wore a one-piece swimsuit beneath them. Once she opened the hatch, the smell of breakfast practically slapped her stomach awake. It came to life, growling and demanding food. Once Sarah saw the spread, her greed intensified. Cinnamon rolls sat on a serving plate, scrambled eggs mixed with bacon, prawns left over from the night before, and breadcrumbs filled a stainless steel bowl, a pitcher of mango juice sweating beside it. Thankfully, a kettle of coffee finished off the buffet. Rags already had a plate and sat on one of the benches, chomping happily while she scanned the text on a tablet. Alan and Hippie were still loading their plates. Alan glanced at her and grinned. "The animals welcome you to the first mission meal." She chuckled. "My mission meals usually consisted of MREs, and they were shitty." "Not these," Hippie said. He plucked a piece of bacon from the spread and munched it while waiting for Alan to move to the next platter. "Never a shit meal on Keko. Hopper would never tolerate it." "Holy shit, are you spoiled," Sarah said with a laugh. "Reason for that," Kojo said. The man had moved up behind her without a sound. Sarah flinched and quickly turned. Kojo blushed. "Sorry." "Uh-huh," Sarah said. She entered the makeshift serving area, grabbed one of the remaining plates, and filled it with generous portions. "Where are we?" she asked. "About 20 minutes out from the first target," Alan said. "We'll have to zode in the rest of the way. Pretty soon we're going to reach the portion of the islands that have sunk over the past 40 years, and it's not safe to sail through with a ship this size." "Makes sense," Sarah said. "So eat up and get juiced up," Rags said, without looking up from her tablet. "There's water in our future." "Putting it mildly," Alan said. They mostly ate in silence, but each member of the animals had a tablet in their hands and was studying mission details. She noticed another tablet lying on the counter. "Oh," Alan said, "that's yours, loaded with equipment manifests and the like." "What was in those crates?" she asked. Alan swallowed a hearty forkful of egg and wiped at his mouth. "We were just told to assemble this stuff. I know there are a lot of warnings stamped on 2 of the crates. The other 2 we didn't open. No reason to." She nodded but felt uneasy. Was KMB so secretive that they didn't even tell their employees about the equipment they'd be using? Well, to be fair, she didn't know either. She had an idea, however. Before Miskatonic's destruction, Catfish had invented a crude magnesium grenade deadly to the M2 creatures. She imagined K&B had perfected the design for bullets and multi-purpose munitions. She logged into the tablet again using the MFA token, her image, and her password. The tablet came to life with a custom overlay, similar to the one she'd seen on the laptop. Alan had highlighted the inventory list. "We on a mesh network?" Sarah asked. "Yup," Rag said. "The tablets only recognize one another and nothing else. All other connections are rejected." "Nice," Sarah said, and tapped the inventory list. She read it twice before her brain began to process it. 6 AR-style underwater rifles along with 100 phosphorus bolts. 6 AR-style terrestrial rifles, 7.62 millimeter, with 600 rounds of phosphorus ammunition and 600 terrestrial armor-piercing rounds. 12 phosphorus grenades, 12 high-explosive grenades, 12 fragmentation grenades, ROV with light array, 6 complete scuba loadouts along with extra air tanks and accessories, 6 rechargeable handheld acetylene torches, 10 UV light arrays, nitrox, 4 pair night vision goggles, 4 pair night vision binoculars. "Loaded," Sarah whistled. "What does it mean by bolts?" Alan didn't look up from his tablet. "The underwater rifles are modeled after the Soviet APS. To make it more accurate, it fires long projectiles capable of piercing light armor. It doesn't have an effective range over 15 meters, but it's better than nothing." "K&B designed?" Sarah asked. "Of course," Hippie said. "Everything's custom. Can't trace it if it was never purchased in the first place." Sarah blinked at that. K&B was a Black Ops outfit and a disaster troubleshooter. She suddenly didn't want to know the other kinds of missions the animals had been on. "You've used them before?" she asked. Hippie nodded grimly. "Not with phosphorus tips, but with explosives. They're effective. Trust me." "Should break through their armor just fine," Sarah responded. "Armor?" Ellen asked. "What armor?" Sarah almost kicked herself. "The larger the organism, the more likely it is to develop something like chitin. We think it's an outer layer of dead cells, particles, or whatever it's made of. It reabsorbs them when it no longer needs them, or if its mass becomes too low." "Fuck," Rag said. "Glad you mentioned it. Now I understand the reason for the bolts." "How thick do they get?" Kojo asked. "We don't know," Sarah said. "I imagine the more mass they consume, the more they can armor themselves." "Does that armor work against sunlight?" Hippie asked. Sarah bit her lip. "Depends on how you look at it," she said. "The outer layer doesn't combust, but a UV assault slowly destroys it. If the creature is forced to constantly replenish the outer layer, we think it will eventually exhaust its surplus and reabsorb it." "Surplus?" Alan said. "What do you mean?" Sarah thought back to the lectures at Miskatonic, where Jay Hollingsworth had spun insane theory after insane theory until he found one that sort of made sense. "The original researchers and survivors of the M2 incidents at Liger and HAL put forth the theory that M2 particles act like viruses. They come across matter and use it to make copies of themselves, hence the appearance of absorption. However, unlike viruses, these copies are somehow bound together to form a neural network, information traveling through the particles to one another." Rags blinked. "So it's basically building and programming itself?" "Again," Sarah said, "theory. If that theory is true, then at a certain level, the network becomes complex enough to operate on more than a level of sheer instinct. They begin to think and problem solve. Below that level, they merely react to their environment." "Shit," Hippie said. "The larger they are, the smarter they are?" "And they're more likely to use those smarts to protect themselves and hunt prey," Sarah finished the thought. "We only know this through an admittedly short observation period. And again, no one is certain what it will do when no longer constrained by its environment." Alan hadn't touched the rest of his breakfast. Instead, he stared at Sarah with a mix of fear and anger. Hell, she'd be angry too. She couldn't believe she'd omitted that from the briefing. "Perhaps you'd like to mention any other additional details you neglected to cover last night?" Good question. Now she doubted herself about everything. "They can see. They tend to sprout eye stalks or something similar to those of insects and crustaceans. Subjects derived from the original M2 strain tended to resemble those life forms more than anything else." Hippie shook his head. Fucking bugs. Fucking bugs, Sarah agreed. Something between a crab and a spider was their favorite form. At least at Ben Taub. The creatures at HAL were quite similar. Lovely, Alan said. Finish breakfast, animals. T-minus 1 hour until we load into the Zode. After that, we're on mission. Understood? Aye, aye, Alan's team said loudly. Sarah paused a beat before adding her voice, as loud as in her drill days. The animals turned to her as one, their eyes unblinking. Sarah blushed. Rags started laughing, and soon they all were. She had time to secure her berth, offload some breakfast into the head, undress down to her swimsuit, and find the hold. While Sarah hadn't known exactly what to expect, she'd imagined a large, dimly lit area with crates upon crates of supplies, stowed amidst pipes and lines. Instead, the hold was brightly lit and well organized, and she knew immediately what she needed and where to get it. The ship's supplies were at the hold's rear, while those for the animals were neatly stacked in an uncluttered area. The crates, made of highly durable plastic, had each been opened and their contents laid bare. Rags stood in front of the scuba loadouts, her naked, well-tanned body shocking Sarah for a second. The larger woman turned and winked. Sorry, she said, as she stepped into her wetsuit. Don't like getting bunched up, if you know what I mean. Once Rags zipped the wetsuit halfway up, the top dangling behind her like an odd skirt, she pulled a t-shirt from beside the crate and covered her chest. Better? Sarah laughed. I have no complaints, just not used to. I know, Rags said, rolling her eyes. Just don't be shocked when you see one of the men naked. It always happens. It always happens. She sighed heavily. It always happens. The expression on Rags's face made Sarah laugh. Rags dropped to her knees, draped the utility belt over her shoulder, and grabbed her mask and tank before standing and nodding to Sarah. See you topside, Rags said, and walked up the stairs. Sarah's scuba loadout was clearly marked, and her tank looked different. The masks were odd, too. A dimly lit green LED glowed from inside hers. After stepping into her wetsuit, leaving it to drape much as Rags had, she hoisted her loadout and headed up the stairs. Alan waited at the top, already dressed to go into the water. Well, you look mostly ready, he said. Mostly. I didn't see the weapons down there, so... Already loaded into the Zode, Alan said. We took care of that first thing, but you'll still need to check your inventory once we get the boat into the water. She nodded. Why's my tank different? He grinned. Smart tank. For noobs. Lovely, Sarah said. Seriously, it'll help you out. Less to worry about. We're not going deep anyway, so it won't much matter. Still, Cephas or Bryant thought it was a good idea. I'll have to thank them, Sarah said. What about getting the bends? Alan grinned. We're not diving all that deep. Plus, we're using nitrox, which has a much lower nitrogen concentration. Shouldn't be a problem at our depth. Gotcha, she said. He clapped his hands together. Nothing left for you to do but get to the stern and play the hurry-up-and-wait game. Copy that, she said. He moved aside and let her pass before disappearing into the hold. She watched him go, wondering exactly what else he needed from there. Kojo, Rags, and Hippie stood at the railing near the Zode's crane and cradle. She walked to where they stood and stopped. New Britain was kilometers away, but the massive island was easily visible, its lush, moisture-ridden landscape sparkling in the newly risen sun's light. That's beautiful, Sarah said. Hippie turned his head to her, a grin on his face. If you look north, you'll see the Doi. Sarah raised an eyebrow. Doi? Rags chuckled and pointed to the ship's port side. He means the Duke of York Islands. Sarah walked to the port railing and found herself frozen. The island of Makada, the most northwestern island in the tiny chain, had shrunk from 3.6 square kilometers to 1.2 and appeared as little more than a hump in the distance. The tropical rainforest at the shore consisted of tree stumps and debris lodged against the high shoreline. The famous white beaches she'd seen in photos taken in 2021 were nowhere to be found. Rocky outcrops bulged out of the water, and the surrounding islands of the archipelago looked shrunken. How high had the water risen here? Alan walked up next to her and dangled his arms over the railing. Pity, isn't it? What happened here? She asked. Shrugging, he said, "One too many tsunamis, one too many centimeters of sea rise, and one too many volcanic eruptions preceded and followed by one too many earthquakes. Last couple fractured the seabed surrounding the island. Now it's sinking as well as flooding. In another decade or two, it may all be underwater and in a new trench." She shook her head. "And tourists still come to fish?" "One of the last unpolluted places you can do that without going deep sea." Alan rubbed at his arms. "Wish I'd put some lotion on." The boat's engines broke their steady hum and went silent. Alan grinned. "Almost time," he said. "Now, tell me how to scuba dive." After a moment's hesitation, Sarah rattled off the parts and functions of the equipment she held. When she came to the mask, she only said, "Combination rebreather and mask." "Very good," he said. "Also, there's a mic in there. You can communicate with the team over another mesh network." "No shit," she said. "You have all the toys." "Why wouldn't we?" he said. "We're the animals." Chapter 6. The Zode ripped through the calm waves for the first 50 meters before Kojo brought the electric engines to a halt. With only the sound of the water lapping against the boat and the distant bird song, Sarah thought she could close her eyes and sleep here. The water, so crystal clear that she could easily see the bottom from 24 meters up, looked cool and inviting. Fish swam below them, some chasing, some chased. Others idly nibbled away on the coral and remaining fauna, oblivious or indifferent to the craft gliding across the ocean surface above them. After a month of being more or less confined to Miskatonic University's grounds, being out in open space, unsheltered by bulkheads, partitions, and the constant fear of facing an alien thing, she finally relaxed. The knot in her shoulders that she hadn't even realized existed let go. Maybe it was from the sun growing higher in the sky, the already balmy air turning hotter by the minute. The closer they came to the first of the Duke of York Islands, really nothing more than a 1 kilometer wide, 40-meter-long hump that stood 10 meters out of the water, the more she understood how much the sea level had eaten away at the area. Makada Island had all but disappeared, only its highest point remaining visible. Eucalyptus trees still stood atop the island like a rear guard facing annihilation. Another portion of the island, much smaller, barely broke the ocean surface. Kojo goosed the rudder, and they turned hard to starboard. At the last second, she saw what he had, another stretch of Makada Island, little more than a few centimeters below the water. "Well, this is tricky," Sarah said to Alan. "You ever been here?" He wiped the sweat from his forehead and flicked the moisture away. "Nope," he said. "This is, or was, much more of a tourist area. Not some place you go for, missions." "Until now," she said. "Until now," he agreed. "Kojo has been to the area before, but not since he was a boy." He looked back at the P&G native. "Right, Kojo?" The tattooed man nodded with a toothy grin. "It was a lot bigger then," he said. "Not so big now." Sarah turned back to watch as they passed the seemingly sinking island. "How long before the whole island falls into the sea?" "When's the next earthquake or volcanic eruption?" Alan shook his head. "Your guess is as good as anyone's." They were quiet for a moment, Alan occasionally looking over the side to check for outcrops Kojo might miss. Sarah, however, had her face less than half a meter from the water. The corpses of trees, killed by the ocean, stuck upward from the sunk portions of the islands like lampposts. Kojo goosed the electric engines once they were halfway past Makada and entered easily navigable water. Sarah looked at the ocean with longing. When she left Houston, what felt like minutes ago, it had been cool, bordering on cold, as the area headed into winter. It was practically summer here in the southern hemisphere, and the moisture-laden air pulled sweat from her pores. Clean, clear, blue water. How soon would they tumble over the sides and into the blessed cool? "Hey, Rags," Alan called out. "You getting telemetry?" "Yep," she said from behind Sarah. "Picking up a lot of shit, though." "Telemetry?" Sarah asked. Alan grinned. "Satellite images of the area. Our friend Moore has access to some serious resources. Been going at it since yesterday, is my understanding." "While I was on my way here," she thought. "Is that going to help us locate anything?" "Depends," he said. "If the islanders took the lifeboat, they might have secreted it away in a lagoon or maybe a grotto. If they did that, we likely won't find it using the satellites. Too much overgrowth from trees and brush. We might get lucky, though." Luck. She felt sure Alan knew better than to trust luck. In Sarah's experience in the field, luck was a two-way street. As often as it helped you, it helped your adversary. She'd rather count on information, decision-making, and talent. While she was sure this team had the latter two, the first was virtually non-existent. They had a 60-square-kilometer area to search, even though many of the smaller islands were mostly underwater. Until they inspected every portion of the island chain's coast, it would be impossible to know where the lifeboat had gotten to. "Where is the village?" Sarah asked. Alan pointed to the large landmass looming beyond Makada, the Duke of York Island. Before the island started sinking, and the last bout of earthquakes and eruptions, there was a village called Urakuker. It was evacuated over a decade and a half ago, and citizens resettled to New Ireland and New Britain. "Good thing, too," Kojo said. "Next earthquake not only fractured parts of the island, the village more or less sank into the sea." Alan nodded. "Portions of it are sitting in 7 meters of water." "If they were sending satcoms from that area, you think they sunk the lifeboat and hid it in the ruins?" "Not necessarily," Alan said. "But there's a lot of tree line hanging over the island, and it makes great cover to hide things. If they wanted to ensure the boat couldn't be seen by search planes, or, more importantly, satellites, it would be a fantastic place to hide it. A few of the rooftops still stick up out of the water." She wiped a sheen of sweat from her forehead and inwardly cursed more. "Hotter than hell here. I have to dive into the water, and M2 could be sitting down there. Why the fuck am I here again?" Simple. She'd been dumb enough to take an oath, one she intended to keep. She just hadn't realized it would mean traveling halfway across the world into an ecosystem on the verge of collapse. "Well," she heard Given's voice in her mind, "at least it ain't the desert." Her heart hurt. He'd been dead. How long? 4 days? 5? Fuck. Time zone arithmetic sucks. "Hey, Sarah," Hippie called out from behind her. He sat in his seat, his long braid rippling in the wind. "Yeah?" "If this thing's allergic to the sun, wouldn't it have burned up when they opened up the boat?" "Ah, the billion-dollar question," she thought. Moore hadn't specifically cleared her to mention the evolutions they'd witnessed at Miskatonic. Still, even if her boss had declassified the information for the animals, Sarah wasn't sure how to describe what she'd seen. To make matters worse, the scientific team hadn't had time to run extensive tests before the creatures broke containment. "Not necessarily," she decided to say. "There are plenty of places to hide, especially if there weren't any people inside. Or if it ate them all," she thought. In a way, though, she hoped it had eaten survivors. If the creature had consumed that much mass, the chances of it more or less combusting as a single entity were fairly high. If it had been a small entity, maybe a few milliliters, it could have easily found enough shade to survive. Maybe. Lots of maybes, she thought. She could practically hear Moore saying, "And that's why you're in the doy." "I don't see any boat traffic out here," Sarah said to Alan. "No commercial vehicles over a certain mass allowed," he replied. "And in case you hadn't noticed, this place is a bitch to get to. Last quake created a new reef between here and the populated island. To make matters worse, tourist hotspots on the west of New Britain were destroyed or flooded, and nothing's been rebuilt." "Nothing will be, either," Kojo said flatly. His voice was a rasp, as if he were uncomfortable with the conversation. A few moments passed in silence, the island getting larger by the second. "Heading into the harbor," Kojo called out. Sarah expected to see rotted-out decks or platforms and certainly debris. Instead, there was nothing. She looked over the Zode's gunwale and peered into the clear water. Cliffs of coral descended as far as she could see, hordes of brightly colored clownfish darting through the brain coral gaps as though they were a raceway. The beds, however, didn't look healthy to her. The crowns of the cliffs had large white flower-colored stripes. Sarah knew what that meant. The coral was dying or dead. Coral beds and reefs become bleached under environmental stress from pollutants or warm ocean water. In this case, however, she wasn't sure the damage had been caused by chemicals, oil spills, or even the warming ocean water, but rather by the cracking and crumbling of the earth from the last major quake. Some of the cliffs had collapsed into one another, and parts of the ocean floor appeared buckled and humped. Sarah was sure the beds would repair themselves in time, if there was time. Would M2 eat the coral beds? She shivered at the idea of a massive oil monster flowing over the Great Barrier Reef, consuming all of the ecosystem's life forms and belching out oxygen bubbles in return. The Zode traveled past the edges of the reefs and into shallower water. The ocean floor was no more than 10 meters below them and seemed to be getting shallower by the second. The coral beds were few and far between, but fish and other creatures seemed just as at home there. From the wreckage strewn across the ocean floor, she assumed they were nearing where Urakuker used to be. Now there was nothing more than a shoreline covered in branches from the trees, still above water. Are there any bones down there in that wreckage? Was anyone here during the last tsunami? What did it sound like as the wave roared in from the sea like an angry god, the water frothing and spitting while the liquid kaiju prepared to devour the island with one savage bite? Or was there only an instant before your nerves jangled from the oncoming pressure wave like an incoming mortar round, just before it landed mere meters away? A simple, flat crack that preceded deadly metal bees flying past your ears? She shivered for a moment before the memory faded away. Enough of that, please and thank you. Did they search this? I mean, back when it happened? Yeah, Alan said, the top of his tanned, sweat-beaded head already looking too red. They always do, but it's a low priority these days. He pointed to the top of the Doi, rising some 60 meters above the ocean. People that still live on the island are way up there, he said. No one's dumb enough to try and rebuild anywhere near the water. Kojo made a clicking sound, and Alan rolled his eyes. Sarah felt like she'd missed a joke or some secret language the animals had. It made her remember she was an outsider here, and not really part of this team. While she was fully capable of holding her own and leading these people, at the end of the day, she was still just the embedded external resource. For now. Was this really a harbor? She asked. Kojo laughed from behind her. Not the way you're probably thinking. No lines of docks or anything like that. The larger boats anchored offshore even before the ocean rose. Sarah glanced up at the peaks covered in lush green foliage. She wondered what it would be like to watch a storm come in while sipping a Mai Tai. It'd be a once-in-a-lifetime experience, she imagined, or a frequent one that was no longer exciting, but merely terrifying. There they are, Alan said, pointing to the bow. What had been misshapen specks in the distance were rapidly growing. Now she could make out the telltale slant of an A-frame roof, the last meter sticking upward out of the water. Two more structures peeked out from the surface as if trying to play hide-and-seek and failing miserably. Wow, Sarah said. Yeah, wow, Alan replied, his thumbs tucked beneath the restraints. Imagine it's going to be something inside. The engines cut off and Kojo's eyes focused on his console. Hippie? Yeah, Hippie said and unclipped his restraint belt. Give me a sec, mate. It's hotter than a WP round out here. His braid dripped with sweat. Besides, you haven't slowed us down yet. The engines whined in reverse and Sarah popped against her restraints. Hippie's hip hit the gunnel and he cursed. Didn't give me that time, fucker, he said to Kojo. Kojo grinned at him. I'll try harder. Lads, Alan called out, stop showing off for our new friend and get to business. Aye, they said, neither bothering to hide their smiles. Kojo kept the engines in reverse, but cut the throttle. It was a much gentler deceleration, and her stomach thanked the universe for it. She was a desert rat, not a fish, damn it. The animals might be used to this, but she sure as shit wasn't. Hippie had made his way to the rack and unfastened the scuba tanks. Time to con them up and put on the heavy, he said. Alan unfastened his restraints. Plan is for Kojo to stay with the boat, unless you'd like for us to scout it out first. The water had turned a beautiful shade of green, but no reefs could be seen. Below the surface were the fragments of a crumbled asphalt road, broken concrete, and the remains of smashed buildings. At the same time, the taller structures looked as though they'd fared a bit better and were mostly intact. What would it be like inside? What was living down there? She shook her head. I want to see it. Besides, I might know what I'm looking at better than you. You will at that, he said. To be honest, I'm still not believing this. Sarah nodded. Until you see it, you won't. Well, let's just hope there's nothing down there but the local fauna and flora establishing a new home, yeah? Tanks and weapons, people, Hippie called out. Get 'em while they're fresh.